Do not sign that. The woman holding the coffee tray said, and every powerful person in the room turned towards someone they had barely noticed. The silver pen in Ethan Caldwell's hand stopped less than an inch above the signature line. Around him, the private conference room on the top floor of the Langford Grand Hotel gleamed beneath cold morning light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Washington, D.C. skyline. Crystal water glasses stood beside leather folders. At the center of the polished table rested a contract worth $250 million. Emily Parker had entered only to replace the coffee. Her Navy hotel uniform was plain, her name tag slightly scratched, and one loose strand of dark blonde hair had fallen across her cheek after 6 hours on her feet. No one had asked her opinion. No one had even asked her name. Yet the moment she heard Grant Mercer translate the final Arabic sentence, her hands tightened around the tray. Something was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Dangerously wrong. Grant slowly turned toward her, his expensive gray suit perfectly pressed, his smile polite enough to hide the warning beneath it. Excuse me. Emily looked at the contract displayed on the wall monitor. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it beneath the hum of the air conditioning. Losing this job would mean missing rent. It would mean explaining to 8-year-old Sophie why the electricity bill had to wait another week. But silence would mean watching strangers send a fortune to an account that did not belong to the people sitting across from them. The document is not authentic, she said. The hotel manager near the door went pale. Ms. Parker, please step outside. Grant gave a quiet laugh. Mr. Caldwell, I apologize. The service staff must have misunderstood something. Emily did not move. Across the table, Layla Al-Hassan, legal representative for the International Investment Fund, studied her with sudden attention. Ethan lowered the pen. He was 42, composed, and accustomed to rooms becoming silent when he spoke. This time, he said nothing. He simply watched Emily. Grant pointed toward the screen. The agreement has been reviewed by 6 attorneys. There is no issue. Emily looked directly at Layla and answered in precise Arabic. Her voice calmed despite the tremor in her fingers. She asked whether the fund had approved the escrow beneficiary listed in the English appendix. Layla's expression changed instantly. She replied in Arabic, slowly at first, then faster. Emily listened without interruption. When the woman finished, Emily turned back toward Ethan. She did not say the funds could be released, Emily explained. She said all funds must remain frozen until sovereign verification is complete. Grant's smile disappeared. That is an inaccurate interpretation. Emily placed the coffee tray carefully on a side table. One porcelain cup clicked against its saucer in the silence. No, she said. Your interpretation is inaccurate. The hotel manager stepped forward again, but Ethan raised one hand. His eyes never left Emily's face. How do you know Arabic? He asked. Emily swallowed. I studied it at Georgetown. I lived in Amman for 2 years. I worked with legal and humanitarian documents before my daughter needed me home. Grant leaned back in his chair as though the answer amused him. And now you serve coffee. The words landed softly, but everyone heard what he meant. Emily looked at him without anger. Yes, she said. And the account named in this contract is still fake. Layla closed the leather folder in front of her. Then she reached across the table and pulled the unsigned contract away from Ethan's pen. Do not sign, she said in English. Outside the windows, sunlight flashed across the Capitol dome. Inside the room, $250 million remained untouched, and the woman everyone had overlooked had just become the only person Ethan Caldwell was willing to believe. The silence inside the conference room became heavier than the contract lying unopened on the polished table. Nobody reached for a pen. Nobody reached for a coffee cup. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on Emily Parker, the hotel employee who had somehow transformed from an invisible server into the center of a $250 million negotiation. Grant Mercer was the first to recover. He straightened his jacket and offered an amused smile that appeared calm, but failed to hide the irritation gathering beneath it. Mr. Caldwell, he said evenly. With respect, we are allowing someone with no involvement in this transaction to interrupt months of international negotiations. She has misunderstood a technical translation. Emily remained standing beside the refreshment table. Her pulse refused to slow, but her voice stayed steady. I did not misunderstand the translation, she replied. I understood exactly what she said. Grant folded his arms. Then perhaps you should explain it to everyone. Ethan Caldwell leaned back slightly in his chair without saying a word. His expression revealed neither agreement nor doubt. He simply watched Emily with quiet concentration, studying the confidence that remained in her eyes despite the pressure surrounding her. Emily looked toward Layla Al-Hassan before speaking again. The Arabic sentence your representative used means the funds must remain frozen until sovereign verification is completed. It does not authorize the release of the escrow payment today. Layla nodded once. That is correct, she answered calmly. A quiet murmur spread around the table as several attorneys exchanged uncertain glances. Grant immediately opened another folder and slid a printed document across the polished wood. Then explain this, he said. This appendix carries the identical approval in both languages. Emily stepped closer. She carefully read every line instead of rushing to answer. Several long seconds passed before she gently touched one paragraph with her fingertip. The wording looks similar, she said, but it is not the same. Grant smiled again. Please enlighten us. Emily looked directly at Ethan. This version changes the legal beneficiary of the escrow account. The English text appears ordinary, but the Arabic wording identifies a different receiving entity. One attorney frowned. That could simply be a translation preference. Emily slowly shook her head. Legal Arabic does not work that way. A single word can change the legal identity of the recipient. This document replaces the approved escrow institution with another organization. Grant answered immediately. That is completely false. Emily did not raise her voice. Then call the issuing office using its public legal contact number, not the number printed inside these documents. The room became quiet again. Ethan finally spoke. Why that specific request? Emily answered without hesitation. Because authentic international legal departments never require verification through private contact information included in the same document being questioned. Independent verification protects everyone involved. Layla's expression softened into visible respect. She is correct, she said. Our legal office always instructs partners to verify through publicly listed channels. Ethan slowly closed the leather folder in front of him. He had negotiated billion-dollar agreements on 3 continents, yet no executive briefing had ever explained that simple safeguard. He looked toward Grant. Did you arrange the contact information for this transaction? Grant nodded confidently. Yes, because it simplified communication. Emily quietly added, convenience is often the first thing a fraudulent document promises. The sentence landed with unexpected force. Even the hotel manager standing near the entrance stopped trying to escort her away. Ethan noticed something else. Emily never exaggerated. She never demanded trust. Every answer remained factual, calm, and supported by a reason anyone in the room could verify independently. That was not the behavior of someone seeking attention. It was the behavior of someone trying to prevent irreversible harm. Grant leaned forward and placed another document on the table. Mr. Caldwell, he said firmly. This agreement already carries your electronic approval from 3 days ago. Several executives immediately looked toward Ethan with confusion. Emily felt uncertainty touch her own thoughts for the first time. If the approval was genuine, then perhaps she had overlooked something. She lowered her eyes to study the signature page, and one small detail hidden inside the Arabic date format suddenly caught her attention, causing her heartbeat to quicken for an entirely different reason. Sometimes the smallest detail is the one that prevents the greatest disaster. Emily Parker leaned closer to the contract without touching it, her eyes moving carefully across the Arabic text while the conference room remained completely silent. The electronic approval looked genuine at first glance. Ethan Caldwell's authenticated signature appeared exactly where it belonged, and every page carried matching formatting. Even Emily briefly questioned her own judgment. Then she noticed the date beneath the Arabic verification stamp. Her breathing slowed. The format itself was correct, but the wording identified a regional government office that had stopped using that administrative title nearly 4 years earlier after a national legal restructuring. Anyone translating older legal templates without current experience could easily overlook the difference. Someone who had lived and worked with official Arabic documentation could not. Emily slowly lifted her eyes. This approval was copied from an outdated government template, she said quietly. The office named here no longer exists under this title. Grant Mercer gave a dismissive smile. Government terminology changes all the time. Emily nodded. It does. That is exactly why official legal departments update every authenticated template immediately. This document did not. One of the attorneys quickly searched through reference files on his laptop. Another compared archived legal notices. Neither spoke. Ethan watched both men carefully before turning back to Emily. How can you be certain? He asked. Emily answered with the calm confidence of someone recalling lived experience instead of memorized facts. Because I prepared legal translations in Amman for 2 years. Every government revision required updated certification language. Using an obsolete title on a current transaction would invalidate the document before it ever reached final approval. Layla Al-Hassan looked directly at Emily with growing respect. She switched naturally into Arabic and asked several detailed legal questions that became increasingly technical with each sentence. Emily answered each one without hesitation. She matched the formal vocabulary, corrected a quotation from an international commercial regulation, and even recognized an expression unique to Jordanian legal practice. The attorneys around the table could not understand the language, but they understood something else. Two fluent professionals were no longer debating whether Emily spoke Arabic. They were discussing legal procedure as equals. Grant interrupted before the conversation continued further. This proves nothing, he insisted. Fluency does not make someone an expert in international finance. Emily did not argue. Instead, she gently slid the contract back toward the center of the table. Then let the documents speak instead of me, she replied. Call the legal office using the publicly listed number on the fund's official government registration. Do not use any telephone number contained inside these files. Ethan slowly reached for his own phone. Do we have the public registry? One attorney immediately nodded. Yes, we can access it within minutes. Grant's confidence weakened for the first time. There is no reason to delay the transaction over procedural formalities, he said. The banking window closes this afternoon. Emily looked toward him with quiet composure. Fraud always benefits from urgency. The simple sentence settled heavily over the room. Ethan had negotiated enough international agreements to recognize that truth. Honest partners welcome verification. Only dishonest transactions demanded speed above certainty. He instructed his executive assistant to retrieve the official registry and place the call immediately. While everyone waited, Emily quietly stepped back toward the refreshment station. She no longer wanted to be the center of attention. She only wanted the truth confirmed before anyone lost $250 million. As she lowered her eyes, she thought briefly about Sophie waiting at school, the overdue utility bill folded inside her purse, and the possibility that this single decision might cost her the only steady job she had left. Across the room, Ethan noticed that she never once asked for recognition, payment, or even gratitude. She simply stood beside the untouched coffee service, hoping she had not arrived too late. Then the speakerphone rang, the international connection opened, and a receptionist from the fund's publicly registered legal office answered the call. Her first sentence caused every person around the table to straighten in stunned silence. We have no record of the escrow documents you are describing. Truth rarely arrives with perfect timing, but it always demands a decision. The conference room fell into complete silence after the voice from the International Legal Office repeated the same answer. We have no record of the escrow documents you are describing, and we have not authorized any transfer connected to that beneficiary. Ethan Caldwell slowly lowered his phone onto the polished conference table without taking his eyes off Grant Mercer. The temperature inside the room suddenly seemed colder. The skyline beyond the glass walls remained bright beneath the late morning sun, yet every person present understood that something far more serious than a simple translation error had just unfolded. Grant forced a calm smile that no longer reached his eyes. There has to be some misunderstanding, he said. Perhaps they are reviewing an older file. Layla Al-Hassan immediately answered in fluent English. Our legal office does not confuse active transactions involving $250 million. Emily Parker remained beside the refreshment station, saying nothing. She had not entered the room hoping to prove herself right. She had entered carrying fresh coffee, and now she quietly wished none of this had become necessary. Ethan stood from his chair and closed the unsigned contract. No funds move until every document is independently verified, he said firmly. One executive looked toward the digital clock mounted on the conference room wall. The banking authorization window closes in 12 minutes, he reminded everyone. Grant quickly stepped forward. If we delay now, the entire investment could collapse. Months of negotiations will disappear because we listened to a hotel employee instead of the professionals assigned to this transaction. Emily finally spoke again, her voice steady but respectful. Legitimate business survives. Careful verification. Fraud depends upon people being afraid to slow down. The words settled heavily across the room. Ethan looked toward his chief financial officer. Where does the wire transfer stand? The chief financial officer opened the secure banking dashboard on his laptop and felt his expression tighten. The payment instruction has already entered the authorization queue. Unless we intervene, the transfer will be released automatically when the countdown expires. 11 minutes remained. Ethan immediately instructed the finance department to suspend the transaction. A tense silence followed before the chief financial officer looked up again. The bank requires confirmation from the escrow institution before they will freeze an international release of this size. Layla turned toward Emily. During our conversation earlier, you mentioned a verbal security protocol. Emily nodded. Every high-value transaction our organization handled in Jordan required a spoken authentication phrase before emergency instructions could be accepted. If your fund still follows that practice, the legal office should know it. Layla immediately called her legal department again. This time she asked for the emergency verification phrase in Arabic. After receiving the response, she repeated it exactly to the banking representative monitoring the transfer. Several long seconds passed. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for the untouched coffee that had long since grown cold. The only sound came from the digital countdown, quietly marking each passing second. Then the speakerphone crackled back to life. Emergency verification accepted, the banking officer announced. The transfer has been frozen pending investigation. Relief spread silently through the room. 10 seconds later, another notification appeared on the financial dashboard, confirming that $250 million remained safely inside Caldwell Meridian's account. Ethan slowly released the breath he had been holding. Grant, however, looked toward the conference room door instead of the frozen transaction. It was a small movement, but Emily noticed it immediately. Someone whose only concern was correcting an honest mistake would have looked at the saved investment. Someone worried about something else would be thinking about leaving. Ethan noticed the same glance. Their eyes met for only a brief moment, and without speaking, either of them understood that saving the money had not ended the story. It had only revealed that the greatest danger had been sitting inside the room all along. People often believe the hardest part of telling the truth is speaking it. Sometimes the hardest part comes after everyone finally believes you. Ethan Caldwell remained standing beside the conference table as the banking confirmation continued glowing across the financial dashboard. $250 million had been secured, yet nobody celebrated. Every person in the room understood that someone had carefully prepared false documents, manipulated international legal language, and nearly redirected one of the largest transactions in the company's history. Ethan turned calmly toward Grant Mercer. I want every document associated with this transaction collected immediately, he said. No files leave this room until our legal department completes an independent review. Grant forced another composed smile, although the confidence that had defined him all morning had almost disappeared. That is completely reasonable, he answered. I welcome any review because I have nothing to hide. Ethan nodded once before looking toward the chief financial officer. Please contact our internal legal team and corporate compliance office. Within minutes, additional attorneys entered the conference room, carrying secure document cases and encrypted laptops. Every printed contract, every digital file, and every email record connected to the transaction began passing through formal verification. Emily Parker quietly stepped away from the center of the room. She believed her responsibility had ended the moment the transfer was frozen. She picked up the coffee tray she had carried inside nearly an hour earlier. Most of the cups remained untouched, their warmth long gone. Before she reached the door, the hotel operations manager approached her with a troubled expression. Emily, he said softly, I need you to come with me. She understood before another word was spoken. Inside the manager's office, the atmosphere felt far smaller than the executive conference room upstairs. The manager removed his glasses and sighed heavily. You violated guest service policy by interrupting a private client meeting, he explained. I know your intentions may have been good, but corporate procedure leaves me very little choice. Emily listened quietly. She did not argue. She did not remind him that $250 million had just been protected. She simply nodded. I understand, she answered gently. The manager placed a temporary suspension notice on the desk. Human Resources will complete a formal review within 48 hours. Until then, I have to ask you not to report for scheduled shifts. Emily folded the paper carefully and placed it inside her purse beside the overdue electric bill she had been carrying all week. As she walked through the hotel lobby toward the front entrance, afternoon sunlight poured through the revolving glass doors, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were already with Sophie. School would finish in less than 2 hours. She needed to smile when she arrived because her daughter always recognized worry before words could hide it. Meanwhile, back inside the conference room, the legal review continued, moving faster than anyone expected. One attorney quietly approached Ethan with an early finding. The escrow company listed in the altered appendix does not appear in any legitimate international financial registry, he reported. Another investigator added that the listed mailing address belonged to an office building with no registered financial institution inside. The evidence continued growing. Grant remained seated, answering questions with increasing hesitation. Ethan watched him carefully. The man who had spent years presenting himself as calm under pressure now avoided direct eye contact whenever specific documents appeared on the screen. Late that afternoon, another discovery arrived. Several authorization emails directing revisions to the escrow paperwork had originated from a private server instead of the company's secure communication system. Every message traced back to an account created under Grant's supervision. Ethan slowly closed the investigation folder. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt disappointment that trust had been treated as something to exploit rather than protect. At that exact moment, his assistant quietly entered the room and informed him that Emily Parker had already left the hotel carrying nothing except her purse and her lunch container. Ethan looked toward the elevator doors for a long moment before making a decision that had nothing to do with the investigation itself. Find her, he said calmly. Not to reward her. To thank her before she believes honesty cost her everything. The price of doing the right thing is often paid long before its reward ever arrives. Emily Parker unlocked the door to her small apartment just before sunset, forcing herself to smile before Sophie could notice the exhaustion behind her eyes. The familiar scent of tomato soup drifted from the slow cooker she had started before leaving for work that morning. Sophie looked up from the kitchen table, where spelling words and math worksheets were spread neatly across the surface. You are home early, she said with an innocent smile. Emily gently placed her purse on the chair and knelt beside her daughter. The hotel had a shorter day than expected, she answered softly. It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. Sophie accepted the answer without another question and happily returned to her homework. Emily quietly unfolded the suspension notice after her daughter looked away. The paper felt heavier now than it had inside the hotel. 48 hours. 2 simple numbers that could determine whether they kept their apartment another month. She slipped the notice beneath a stack of utility bills before Sophie could see it. That evening they shared simple bowls of soup, toasted bread, and quiet conversation about school projects and library books. Sophie excitedly described a science assignment about the planets while Emily listened with genuine interest, grateful that children measured security differently than adults. A warm meal, a loving parent, and someone willing to hear about the solar system could still make an ordinary evening feel complete. After Sophie fell asleep, Emily sat alone beside the apartment window, watching the lights of Washington, D.C. shimmer beyond rows of brick buildings. She questioned every decision she had made inside the conference room. Had she done the right thing? The answer came immediately. Yes. Had it changed her life for the better? She did not know. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell remained inside Caldwell Meridian headquarters long after most offices had emptied. The investigation team continued reviewing contracts, banking records, electronic approvals, and archive correspondence. Every new discovery strengthened the same conclusion. The escrow company listed in the altered documents existed only on paper. The mailing address belonged to a shared office suite rented through a shell corporation. The electronic approval request had traveled through private servers rather than the company's encrypted network. Late that evening, Ethan received another report from corporate compliance confirming that several authorization emails had originated from accounts directly managed by Grant Mercer. Ethan quietly closed the folder and looked through the office windows toward the city below. His company had nearly lost $250 million, yet the person who prevented the disaster was sitting somewhere worrying about paying next month's rent because she had chosen honesty over silence. That reality unsettled him more deeply than the attempted fraud itself. He turned toward his executive assistant. "Have we located Ms. Parker?" The assistant nodded. "We confirmed her address through the hotel's emergency employment records, but we have not contacted her. I wanted your approval first." Ethan remained silent for several thoughtful seconds. "Do not send lawyers," he finally said. "Do not send security. And do not send a reward." The assistant looked surprised. Ethan continued quietly. "She has spent the entire day being judged because of her position instead of her character. I will not make the same mistake by assuming money is what she needs most." The following afternoon, after the investigation formally confirmed that the attempted transfer had been stopped only because Emily questioned the fraudulent translation, Ethan drove himself across the city without a chauffeur or corporate escort. He parked outside a modest brick apartment building where children played on the small patch of grass beside the sidewalk. Through an open window, he heard laughter instead of celebration. Emily and Sophie were assembling a cardboard model of the solar system together at the kitchen table. Ethan remained standing quietly beside his car for a long moment before walking toward the front entrance. Carrying nothing in his hands except the sincere gratitude he realized should have been the very first thing he had offered. Respect becomes meaningful only after it survives the temptation to become charity. Emily Parker opened the apartment door with quiet surprise after hearing the gentle knock. Standing outside was Ethan Caldwell without an executive team, without security, and without the polished confidence that usually surrounded one of the country's most successful business leaders. He wore a simple navy jacket instead of a tailored suit, and for the first time since they had met, there was nothing separating them except the narrow doorway. Emily instinctively glanced toward the kitchen where Sophie continued coloring planets for her school project. "Good afternoon," Ethan said softly. "May I have a few minutes of your time?" Emily hesitated before opening the door wider. "Of course." Ethan stepped inside the modest apartment and immediately noticed the careful order that held everything together. The furniture was simple but spotless. Children's books filled one corner beside a small bookshelf. Family photographs covered the wall above a worn dining table. Nothing suggested wealth, yet everything reflected dignity. Sophie looked up with curious blue eyes. Emily smiled gently. "This is Mr. Caldwell." Sophie politely greeted him before carrying her art supplies into her bedroom, sensing the adults needed privacy. Ethan waited until the bedroom door quietly closed. "I came here to thank you," he said. "Not as the chief executive officer of Caldwell Meridian, but as someone who almost lost $250 million because I trusted the wrong person." Emily shook her head slightly. "You do not owe me anything." Ethan looked directly at her. "I disagree." He carefully removed an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the dining table. Emily did not touch it. "If that is a reward," she said calmly, "I cannot accept it." Ethan immediately slid the envelope back toward himself. "Then I am glad you did not open it," he replied. "Because it is not a check." Emily looked at him with quiet curiosity. Ethan opened the envelope and removed a formal consulting agreement. "Our legal department and international compliance team need someone who understands Arabic legal documentation the way you do. I would like to offer you a temporary consulting contract. The position includes fair compensation, independent authority, and the right to refuse if you believe it is not appropriate." Emily remained silent while reading the first page. There were no hidden conditions, no promises based upon gratitude, and no language suggesting personal favors. Everything described professional responsibilities, transparent compensation, and clearly defined expectations. She slowly placed the agreement back onto the table. "Why me?" she asked. Ethan answered without hesitation. "Because everyone else in that conference room saw your uniform before they saw your knowledge. I was one of them." Emily lowered her eyes. "That happens more often than people realize." Ethan nodded. "I know, and I allowed it to happen inside my own company." A quiet silence settled between them before Emily spoke again. "If I accept this, I have one condition." Ethan listened carefully. The investigation must continue wherever the evidence leads. I do not want my involvement to become a publicity story while someone responsible escapes accountability. Ethan smiled faintly for the first time that afternoon. That condition was already non-negotiable. Emily extended her hand. Then I will help. Ethan shook her hand with genuine respect instead of celebration. Their agreement was not built upon gratitude or sympathy. It was built upon mutual trust, earned through honesty. As Ethan prepared to leave, Sophie stepped back into the room holding her completed solar system model. Mom says every planet stays in place because of gravity, she said proudly. Ethan smiled warmly. Your mother reminded me today that companies stay together for the same reason. Sophie tilted her head. Gravity. Ethan gently shook his head. Integrity. As he walked toward the front door, his phone vibrated with an urgent message from the investigation team. A newly recovered encrypted email suggested Grant Mercer had not acted alone. Someone inside Caldwell Meridian's own board of directors had quietly approved access that made the entire fraud possible. The greatest betrayals are rarely hidden outside the walls. They are invited inside by trust. 2 mornings later, Emily Parker walked through the headquarters of Caldwell Meridian carrying a visitor identification badge instead of a tray of coffee. Employees glanced toward her with quiet curiosity, unaware that the woman they had mistaken for ordinary hotel staff had prevented one of the largest financial losses in the company's history. Ethan Caldwell greeted her personally outside the executive conference floor. Thank you for coming, he said. Emily smiled politely. You asked me to help the investigation. I intend to do exactly that. Inside the secure compliance office, attorneys, financial analysts, and cybersecurity specialists had transformed an entire conference room into a temporary investigation center. Screens displayed timelines, banking records, communication logs, and document histories. Ethan introduced Emily as an independent language and legal consultant. No one questioned the decision. Her knowledge had already earned that respect. A senior investigator projected a sequence of recovered electronic messages onto the main screen. Grant Mercer exchanged encrypted emails with an unidentified internal account over the past 6 months, he explained. Most messages were erased, but our forensic team recovered fragments. Emily quietly studied the Arabic attachments connected to several of those communications. One document immediately caught her attention. Please, enlarge this page, she requested. The investigator complied. Emily carefully examined a handwritten notation in the margin. It appeared insignificant, only a few Arabic words beside a routine legal paragraph. She frowned slightly. This note was not written by Grant. Everyone looked toward her. Ethan asked, How can you tell? Emily pointed gently at the handwriting. Grant copied formal Arabic from prepared templates. Whoever wrote this note thinks naturally in the language. The grammar is too fluid. The sentence structure is personal rather than translated. Layla Al-Hassan, connected through a secure video conference, reviewed the image herself. After several thoughtful moments, she slowly nodded. She is correct. This margin note was written by someone fluent enough to edit legal language instinctively. The room became silent again. The investigator quickly searched employee records for executives with advanced Arabic proficiency. Only 3 names appeared. 2 had been traveling overseas during the relevant period with verified documentation. The 3rd remained inside Caldwell Meridian headquarters throughout the entire timeline. Richard Holloway, senior board member, chair of international investments. Ethan stared at the screen without speaking. Richard had served beside him for nearly 12 years. He had attended company retreats, celebrated employee achievements, and publicly promoted ethical leadership at shareholder meetings. Emily quietly noticed the disappointment crossing Ethan's face. Evidence deserves patience, she said softly. Trust should never replace proof. Ethan nodded. Agreed. Rather than confronting Richard immediately, the compliance team continued building a complete record. Financial analysts discovered that shell corporations connected to the fraudulent escrow account shared administrative services with investment firms Richard had quietly recommended during previous board discussions. Cybersecurity specialists recovered meeting schedules showing private conversations between Richard and Grant before every major document revision. Piece by piece, coincidence became a pattern. That afternoon, the full board assembled inside. The executive conference room for what members believed was a routine investigation update. Richard entered confidently, greeting colleagues with his usual professional smile. Ethan remained calm as he welcomed everyone before placing a single investigation folder in the center of the polished table. "Before we discuss future investments," he said evenly, "there is one matter concerning integrity that deserves every person's full attention." Richard's expression remained unchanged until the first recovered Arabic document appeared on the presentation screen. Emily watched quietly from the back of the room as recognition flickered across his face for only an instant before disappearing again. It lasted less than a second, but after everything she had learned, 1 second was all the truth needed. Character is never revealed by the moment someone is trusted. It is revealed by what they choose when that trust can no longer protect them. The executive conference room remained completely silent as the recovered documents appeared one by one across the large presentation screen. Ethan Caldwell stood at the head of the table without raising his voice. Every email, every banking authorization, every altered legal attachment, and every encrypted communication had been independently verified by internal compliance specialists and outside investigators. Richard Holloway slowly closed the folder that had been placed before him. For the first time in 12 years, he had no convincing explanation to offer. He quietly admitted that he had approved confidential access for Grant Mercer after being promised substantial financial returns through offshore investment accounts once the transfer was completed. Several board members lowered their eyes in disappointment. Others remained speechless, realizing that the company's greatest weakness had never been its security systems. It had been misplaced trust. Ethan calmly informed the board that all evidence would be delivered to the appropriate authorities and that the company would cooperate fully with every lawful investigation. No celebration followed. Integrity did not feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. As the meeting concluded, Ethan turned toward Emily Parker, who had remained near the back of the room throughout the entire presentation. "There is one final matter," he said. Every board member looked toward her. Ethan placed a new folder on the conference table. "Several days ago, you accepted a temporary consulting agreement. Today, I would like to replace it." Emily opened the folder slowly. Inside was a formal offer appointing her as Director of International Ethics and Cross-Border Compliance, reporting directly to the Chief Executive Officer. The position included authority to review international documentation independently, recommend compliance reforms, and train employees to recognize cultural and legal risks before financial decisions were made. Emily looked up quietly. "This is far more responsibility than I expected." Ethan smiled gently. "Not because you saved $250 million. Because you were the only person in that room who valued the truth before knowing whether it would benefit you." Emily remained silent for several thoughtful moments before signing the agreement. She understood that this opportunity had not been given to her because she needed help. It had been earned because she had protected something larger than herself. Over the following months, Caldwell Meridian introduced a new international verification program built upon the lessons learned from that single morning. Every major cross-border transaction required independent cultural and linguistic review alongside financial analysis. Employees attended integrity workshops led jointly by Emily and the compliance department, where they learned that expertise could never again be measured by appearance, job title, or social status. The program soon became recognized throughout the industry as one of the strongest ethical compliance models in international business. Emily continued living in the same apartment until she and Sophie were ready for a new beginning, never forgetting the years that had taught them resilience. Sophie proudly told her classmates that her mother helped companies tell the difference between honest people and dishonest paperwork. Ethan often smiled whenever he heard that description because it captured the truth better than any corporate title ever could. One afternoon, several months later, Emily and Sophie visited Caldwell Meridian headquarters after school. Sophie noticed the framed mission statement hanging inside the main lobby. Integrity above everything else. She looked up at Ethan with a curious smile. "Did that always hang there?" Ethan gently shook his head. "No. Someone reminded us to put it there." Emily quietly smiled without saying a word. She knew the sign itself had never changed the company. The people inside it had. Sometimes the most valuable person in the room is the one everyone mistakes for invisible, because wisdom does not arrive wearing expensive clothes. and honesty does not announce itself before speaking. It simply stands up when everyone else remains seated, tells the truth without asking for recognition, and quietly changes lives that may never fully understand how close they came to losing everything.